Hello, everyone. This is Debra Richardson, and today I am putting the AP in Happy, where accounts payable teams are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. This podcast will give a voice to accounts payable team members by talking about the growing reality of cyber attacks in their world and which vendor setup and vendor management techniques they can apply to protect the vendor master file from fraud. If you are looking for vendor process training for you or your entire vendor team, head over to my site at debrarrichardson.com and click on the Vendor Team Training Solved button to learn more about what is included in the monthly or annual plan and also to download a 2021 training schedule. Get the training that you and your team needs to avoid payment fraud, duplicate vendors, compliance fines, and more. In today's episode, I have Casey Allen, a cybersecurity professional, to explain what your IT team is doing to protect your emails and what you can do to protect that small percentage that we all know still gets through to your inbox. And it's not just about reviewing the email, although that's needed too. It's about having that conversation with IT and going in knowing what to ask for. Keep listening. Welcome to episode 151. Debra Richardson talks with Casey Allen on steps your IT team is taking to prevent email fraud and accounts payable, and conversations you should be having with IT. Today, I have on the podcast a great guest, Casey Allen. And Casey is a cybersecurity professional. And when I initially talked to him, he told me that he had just come back from a conference and that he might not be able to sleep well for the next few nights because they talked all about cyber criminals and what professionals are doing to try to thwart them. And yeah, that prognosis between who's winning, I'll let him tell you all about that. And on that note, Casey, why don't you introduce yourself, tell everybody about your background, and welcome.
Thanks so much for having me on, Debra. So my name's Casey Allen. I'm the Director of Information Security and Privacy at Concentric. We're a full-service physical and cybersecurity risk consultancy. And the conference that she mentioned, this is the annual Black Hat Conference down in Las Vegas. So one of the biggest cybersecurity conferences every year. And being back there in person this year, it definitely does its job of scaring us into getting better at our jobs, because the long and short of it is that the bad guys are winning and we should all just pack it up and go home.
Oh, wow.
No, I'm joking. It's always a bit of a cat and mouse game with the offense and the defense. And it's one of the things I really enjoy about working in cybersecurity, coming from a military background. I feel like, I'm continuing that fight, good versus evil. It's just our battlefield is now cyberspace instead of the kinetic battlefields of the early 2000s. So happy to be on here, and hopefully we can get some good questions answered.
Yeah. And, thanks for talking about that conference too. Number one, when we talked the first time, it was, we had our cameras on and I can kind of see the look in your eye. And I was like, what's that? But you know what? It's great. I love that we're fighting the good fight. And so with that in mind, I come from, I was a practitioner. And so my listeners are accounts payable team members, right? We have them in every organization. All organizations need to pay bills. And so we know that we receive emails, right? Some good, some bad. Accounts payable team members, they're checking to see if they're spoofed emails. We don't necessarily know how they got there, but they got to us. So can you explain what options their IT teams have in making sure the emails we receive are not from cyber criminals?
Certainly. So, first of all, it's worth saying that there's no security measures we can put in place that are going to be 100% effective, short of moving out to an island with no internet connection, and then we wouldn't be receiving any emails in the first place. So, besides that, there's a couple different categories of controls that are available to us. So, we've got physical security controls, we've got technical controls, and we have administrative controls. So the physical controls aren't going to help us out a whole lot in this situation because we're talking about information flowing basically all over the wire. So these emails can come in from anywhere. So that leaves us with the technical and the administrative controls. So on the technical side, one of the best ways to prevent this kind of email-based fraud is through digital certificates. And basically what those are is it's a cryptographic way to send emails back and forth that, number one, they're used to verify the identity of the sender. So, the thinking is only the authorized sender is going to have access to whatever certificate they're using to sign their emails. And basically, if you get one of those emails and it is properly signed, then you know that it's coming from who you think it's coming from. And another thing that they're used to do is to prevent the unauthorized interception of these messages while they're in transit. So they can be used to encrypt these emails in a way that nobody's able to grab them as they're going over the wire, make changes to them, and then intercept them on the way back. So that's one of the easiest ways.
Yeah.
Now, there are some ways that attackers get a little bit creative when they're trying to send us these emails. So sometimes they'll find a domain that's similar to what you're expecting to see. If you're talking about bankofamerica.com, they might put an extra letter in there, or use a character that's similar to what you're expecting to see, like a 0 instead of an O. It's called domain squatting, and basically to someone who's not paying careful attention, and looking at tons of emails every single day, it's easy for one of those to slip in, and they can get pretty elaborate in terms of using these companies' logos and the typeface that you're used to seeing to make them look pretty believable. So when it comes to those kinds of targeted phishing campaigns, one of the ways to protect from that is in the category of administrative controls, which is primarily security awareness training. So I'm sure a lot of groups are used to getting these kinds of trainings in terms of phishing recognition and prevention, but it's important that those aren't just one-time efforts. They should be ongoing and continuous, just to make sure that the group doesn't become complacent and forget all the things that they learned before. So one of the challenges for me, I have to remember that not everybody lives and breathes cybersecurity and thinks about these kinds of things all day. So I need to put myself in the shoes of these AP professionals, for example, to understand how we can keep the vigilance up, but at the same time not create all these obstacles for them to be able to succeed in their jobs.
Yeah, and that is so true, right? And one of the things that I say all the time is that, no one can be 100%, 100% of the time to catch all these fraudulent emails. And so you do need to have those technical controls in place and those administrative controls in place. And I'm glad you mentioned domain squatting, because I've heard of what is it? You talked about the 0 instead of the O. And then I heard before about and you probably have too, about where you use 2 V's instead of the W. And then,
Right.
yeah, what else is it? The capital I instead of the L. And so they're getting, cyber criminals are getting smarter and smarter. I do have a question for you, though, is there is a resource called whois.com, or a website, whois.com. And that whois like a database of domains and like when their registration dates are. And I often kind of cite that as a way to just do a temperature check on, what you receive. Like, don't type in what you think you received, because you're going to put that W instead of the 2 V's, right? copy and paste it in there and then see when that site was registered. And if it's like a Microsoft site and it was registered 2 weeks ago or 2 months ago, that's incorrect. Is that something that you guys use, or is that a good tool for accounts payable team members to use as we receive these emails that we have suspicions on?
Absolutely. I'm really happy you brought that up. That's a tool that I've seen a lot of IT folks use, myself included. Haven't seen any AP teams using that, but it would be fantastic if that became a more common tool in the tool chest to prevent these kinds of things. So Whois is a great resource. There's lots of different things you can look at in there. So if a domain was registered, in the past couple of days, that's a pretty good indication that, it's a cyber group that's basically standing up the command and control infrastructure to be able to execute these attacks, because the systems they use are very ephemeral. They stand up all this infrastructure, launch their campaign, and then eventually people become wise to it, so they tear it all down, and then they build it up again somewhere else, so it doesn't have all the same IP reputation issues and everything else. So it's kind of like whack-a-mole, right? But that's an excellent tool to just do a little due diligence and see if you think it is who you think it is. Another good indication is if the website has an HTTPS certificate.
Yes.
And so that's usually the little lock that shows in the top left next to the URL. Those certificates cost money. So for most attackers, they're not going to spend the extra time and money to stand up those certifications for their sites. But we are seeing a trend with some of the more advanced persistent threats and things like that. They are taking the time to do that because they know that it's a signal of trust. Just seeing that to me isn't good enough, but it is a red flag. Go somewhere like a bank, they are for certain going to have one of those HTTPS certificates on their website.
Yeah, and so if you don't see it, then that's a huge red flag.
Absolutely, yes.
Got it. Okay. All right. Good advice. And so, again, you talked about it, right? So the IT team has put in these, technical controls to make sure the emails that get to us are not fraudulent. But as you said, we both know, our listeners do too, that blocking these emails, is just not 100%. So why, right? What are these cyber criminals and fraudsters doing to make it past these technical controls?
Well, there's a lot of different techniques that they're using. For one thing, they're able to spoof domains. So that means instead of just doing the domain squatting, they're actually able to trick some email providers into thinking that the email they're sending is from the actual domain that they're intending it to look like it's from. And there's a couple of different things on the sender side that IT professionals can put in place to prevent this. So there's three main things to set up to prevent that. So number one is called Sender Policy Framework. Mm-hmm. And what that does is it restricts who can send emails from your domain. So the three major elements to that, it's got an authentication method, some specialized headers in the email itself, and a policy framework. And what that means, basically, if it's put in place and somebody tries to send an email from your domain, the receiving end is going to check against that record, and it'll be able to tell if it's really coming from there or not. And if it's not, it's either going to be blocked or it's going to get sent to junk or spam, and it's usually reported to whoever the email provider is if that doesn't match. The second piece of that is called DKIM, which stands for Domain Keys Identified Mail. And that just ensures that the content of those emails is trustworthy and that it hasn't been, either tampered with or compromised in some way. And then lastly is what's called DMARC, Domain-Based Message Authentication, Reporting, and Conformance, I believe is the C. And basically what DMARC does, it ties the other protocols, SPF and DKIM, together into a consistent set of policies, and it links the sender's domain name with what it's actually listed in the from header, and then has some reporting capabilities for the mail recipients. So that prevents a lot of the spoofing. Again, these things aren't 100% effective. There are some ways around this, but if these three things are in place, that's going to mitigate, I'd say 85 to 95% of the domain spoofing that's going to happen.
Okay. So 85%, I like that. That's good. But you still have to contend with those 15% of those emails that are getting through. We know that IT has options. You just talked about those, and they're utilizing all the options that they have. But again, still these 15% are getting through. So my question is, what else can be done?
Yeah, so there's a totally different kind of workflow that can be used for transmitting this kind of data, and it's basically secure messaging escrow services. So essentially, what this means is there's a platform in place where the actual message lives, and what happens is the recipient gets an email from this service and says, "You have a message here." So you follow the link over to that service, sign in there, and once you authenticate, you're able to get delivery of the message. Now, there's a lot of security benefits to doing that, but in my opinion, the big downside is you still have to click a link to get to whatever the service is. So if I'm an attacker, I can emulate one of those services, send you an email that looks like I've got a message somewhere. I follow that link, and it's really a dummy website, and then I enter in my credentials for the real one, and now the attacker is able to capture those credentials and is able to gain access to the secure message platform. So there's a relatively easy way around that, which would be to use something like a password manager. LastPass is the one that I use. It's available for free. And what that does is if you follow that link, and you're signed into your password manager, it's going to autofill your credentials, but only if you're at the actual website. So if you click a malicious link, it takes you to somewhere else that's trying to grab your credentials, and you don't see that your password manager is trying to fill it out. That's another strong indicator that I'm somewhere I'm not supposed to be, because only on the real legitimate site is it going to fill in my credentials.
I love that. And I love that you brought up LastPass and that you use LastPass, because now I feel totally legitimate because I use LastPass too. And I don't even try to remember what my passwords are, because you don't have to. I mean, they have these long length passwords, and they're, a mix of letters and lowercase, uppercase, symbols, and you can tell it, to follow whatever the criteria are for whatever website you're signing into or you're adding to this LastPass. And I just absolutely love it. And I love that you said, right, that if it autofills it, then LastPass has determined that it is a valid website, because I count on that. I really do. And you can even have it on your phone too. And I love that part, because now if I go into one of the sites on my phone, I can still use LastPass. So I do like that. I will say though, I got an email from them a month or so ago to say that I needed to sign up and pay for something, for like a membership. I don't know what it was, but whatever it was, I paid it like in 5 minutes, because it was totally worth it for me. They may still have a free plan. I don't know, but I had to pay for some type of plan. I know I have a lot of passwords and I'm using them on multiple devices. So that could be, totally legitimate. I know I looked at it. It was fine. Whatever it was, I paid it. It was totally worth it. It wasn't prohibitive. Totally worth it. Love LastPass. And it got me out of, because I was guilty of this too, from a few years ago. And then I got, overwhelmed with trying to save, different passwords for every place I needed to go. Because in the past, I was guilty of it too. Same password, every different website you went on. Right. And so then you try to track it, because you're not supposed to do that manually by having separate passwords, and that gets out of hand. But it's all solved with LastPass. I do like that.
Yeah, I can't. It's one of those tools that I can't imagine, life or work without having it. And now that you mention it, I do think in my personal LastPass account, I did have to pony up a couple bucks because maybe the the free tier is over, so they're monetizing a little bit more. But I agree with you. I mean, whatever it costs, I paid it in a heartbeat, just because it's absolutely worth the cost. I mean,
Yeah, don't
no way I could remember things without it.
yeah, don't even know what my passwords are. Don't even want to know. So perfect, love it. I do want to go back though to you were talking about the quarantine. What I remember as like quarantine emails when something looks awry, and then you're right, you do have to click into a link to go in there, look at that email, and say yay or nay, it's good or bad. One of the things I always found about those types of programs is that it would grab all my good stuff. It would like only grab my good stuff.
Right.
So I'm like, I have association emails that are trying to get through. Nope, they're all over in quarantine. I go get them and release them, and they would be fine. But yeah, they would all be in quarantine. But I do have a question though. I don't know, and this could just be me not knowing. And I know I'm flipping around here, but with LastPass, I use it in my personal life and I use it for my professional business. But are companies, do you find that many companies are open to these password managers? I know they're open to the quarantine software. Are they open to the password managers?
So, in my experience, if your organization isn't encouraging or mandating the use of a password manager, they're way behind the curve. I consider it a pretty essential feature for any, even semi-mature organization at this point. There's really just no excuse not to use it, I feel like. And LastPass isn't the only game in town. There's some other ones. Dashlane is another one I'd have no problem recommending. There's another one called Bitwarden that I know is free and open source. So if you really are, a startup trying to pinch pennies, it's still possible to use that. There's also KeePass, which it actually can store the files in a vault locally. So if your concern is not wanting to have your passwords stored up in the cloud somewhere, which I can assure you is safe with LastPass, but just in case, if you have some security policies that prevent that, there is the option to use KeePass and local storage, which can accomplish a lot of the same things. And if your organization doesn't have one of those in its standard suite of tools, I suggest you make some noise about it and get it added, because it's one of the easiest and best things to do to up your security game.
Yeah, and I would think that would be something that would be beneficial to the company, because now, you're not using that same one password to log into your ERP, to log into email, to log into the different tools that you use for your work. I would think it would be a value add or a benefit to the company. So what you're saying is that if you're an accounts payable professional out there and you don't know if your company allows it to go as.
Yes, absolutely. I think so. Because, there are some companies that, maybe don't have an enterprise subscription to it, but they wouldn't object to you using it yourself. And then I think the one step above using something like LastPass even would be to use some kind of single sign-on service like Okta, for example, which, basically there really is no password. It's doing all the authentication over SAML, security assertion markup language. Okay. So that way, I mean, even if you're being waterboarded, you couldn't give up your credentials because you just have no idea. I mean, there's no information to give up there.
Perfect. All right. Okay. So I like those. So what's something else? What about those external email indicators? I actually thought everybody used that, but I actually ran into an accounts payable team that does not use external email indicators. And I was so surprised because I thought everybody did.
Yeah, it's kind of up to the whoever's doing the administration for the email tool. But that is a relatively easy, low effort thing that folks can put in place just to have one more touch point that says turn up the vigilance just a little bit when you're looking at this message because it came from an external party. So again, the implementation of that it kind of varies from organization to organization. But I see no downside to doing it. The only thing it does is just add a little bit of extra visibility.
Yeah, and I've seen so many variations of that. I've seen where it could be as simple as putting, a bracket of capital E and then another bracket in front of the subject line. I've seen where there is lots of text at the top of the body of the email, and it's like all highlighted in red, right? With this is an external email. Be careful before you check links. Be careful. I mean, it's like a whole lot of it. So it's from minimal to maximum, right? But and then all levels in between. But again, I thought everybody had those, and apparently not everyone does. And I like that you say that that can be like a minimal effort thing that your IT team can do.
Yeah, absolutely. You set it up once and it just runs itself. I mean, it doesn't require any maintenance or anything like that.
Yeah.
In terms of how it's actually presented to the user, that's more of a risk-based decision. I think
Yeah.
when we're talking about all the bells and whistles with, highlighted banners and things like that, I typically see that with organizations that deal with a lot of very sensitive data, like law firms or things like that, where they have to ensure that they're maintaining attorney-client privilege, or healthcare organizations, for example, that have a lot of HIPAA protected health information.
Yeah.
So we need to be extra vigilant about that. And then, like you said, there's the whole range in between.
Yeah. All right. So far we talked a lot about what IT is doing, and even with like the password managers that would be really at the user level, you still have to kind of go through your company and verify that's something that either you can do or they have some type of enterprise account for. But what about at the user level? So as accounts payable, team members, practitioners, do they have any options available at their level to eliminate these fraudulent emails coming through? And the reason I ask is because when my last life, right, as a practitioner, at one point we were told that we could type in, was it encrypt? We could type in encrypt, and that would send the email that would encrypt the email. And at that point, my next thing was whatever that meant, right? But we could type that in. Wasn't really quite sure how to use it. We never really got any training on it. So is that something that that accounts payable team members can do, like at the user level, or what other options do we have?
Yeah, that's a great option. So in order to use that functionality, it does require some setup from the IT team in order to install the certifications that are going to be used to perform the encryption. Okay. So there's really two main ways to encrypt email. So number one is called PGP encryption, or PGP stands for pretty good privacy. And it's really designed for encrypting plain text emails. What I think is more appropriate in this conversation would be what's called SMIME, which stands for Secure Multi-Purpose Internet Mail Extension. And basically what that is it's a digital certificate, and there's what's called a public key and a private key. So they're mathematically related, but not identical. And what happens when you encrypt this email, if I'm the sender and I want to encrypt the email to somebody, so I'll use my private key, which I'm the only one that has access to encrypt the message. And then the recipient is able to decrypt that email with my public key. And that performs, the accomplishes what we were talking about earlier, of verifying the identity of the sender. So me as the sender, I'm the only one that has that private key. So if I'm the recipient and I see that private key has been used, I know who sent me the email. And also, without being able to decrypt that, then nobody's able to intercept that message and read its contents without authorization. So there's different ways to initiate that encryption. One way is, like you said, you can set it up so you just type in encrypt. Sometime it's just a little checkbox kind of up near the subject line, the to from subject, and there'll just be a little radio box that you can check that'll encrypt it. Or sometimes, and this is, again, in the really security conscious organizations, they just enforce encryption on every single email. So it kind of runs the whole range there again. So again, those certificates do cost money. They do take a little bit of overhead in terms of maintenance because they don't last forever. They usually when you buy them. They're good for anywhere between a year. Sometimes I've seen them go 2-3 years that they're valid for. So there is some ongoing costs too. But it's a necessary function for it to have an expiration, because if your certificate becomes compromised, you don't want it to be valid forever. You want to be able to revoke that certificate. So if people are trying to send as you, then that certificate's no longer valid, right? So those are some ways that the users can eliminate the fraudulent emails coming through.
Well, and let me ask you though, so with all that encrypted email explanation you just gave, all that stuff in the background with, having the keys and the keys to decrypt, that's all going on in the background, right? Because all I knew to do was type in encrypt.
Yes, that's all happening behind the scenes. Right.
IT setup, we don't have to, make sure that they have the key and that everything's in the background. We just type in encrypt. Because we can do that part.
Yeah, it's for the most part very, very opaque to the actual user. Once you initiate it, everything else happens behind the scenes.
Yeah. And, if I remember correctly, too, when I did use that, I actually had a couple of emails that did not go out. They were stopped because they interpreted some of the numbers that I had on an attached spreadsheet as Social Security numbers. I do remember that. And so that control stopped that email from going out. I guess that's good.
Yeah, that's another pretty standard practice for email security administration now is what's called DLP, or data loss prevention, and that just uses basic pattern matching to say if this email contains 3 numbers, -2 numbers, -4 numbers, then that's most likely a Social Security number, and you can set that up to either stop that email from going out, which would be prevention, or it could send it out and then send an alert that says, hey, this went out, just so you know. And that's more of a detection, but it's a choice between an active or a passive solution there.
Yeah, and that might require some discussion, like with the IT team, because I know, accounts payable teams. Now, I don't happen to think we should be sending, Social Security numbers or things that look like Social Security numbers in a Excel file or something, right? That needs to, more precautions need to be taken for that. But we do get forms, right, via email to set up vendors, for example, that may have, tax IDs on them. And those tax IDs may be Social Security numbers, but they're forms. So for an example, a W-9. So would that be caught in that? Because I think that it would have to have some type of OCR also to identify the fact that there's a Social Security number, a tax ID number on the form.
Yeah, the OCR would be more of an advanced security control. Typically, don't see those in most small or medium-sized businesses. Larger enterprises, sure, but that's a pretty costly control to put in place. And I mean, I think it's valuable, but the other thing is, if you're encrypting that message as it goes out, then a lot of the OCRs and everything else won't be able to look at it because everything in there is going to be encrypted.
Okay. So it protects it. Okay.
Yeah,
so it may be okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what else? And I ask what else because I'm also remembering secure messaging. So as accounts payable team members, we typically get some secure messages from our bank, or, if we happen to do something wrong, we might get a secure message from NACHA, which is, the organization that oversees all of our ACH payment activity, right? And so hate getting one of those secure messages. So, but we do get it. Is that something that we can use maybe to communicate back and forth with our vendors, in a more secure way? Can we use secure messaging for that? Because we never did that before. I haven't in my lives.
Yeah, definitely. That's I think we touched on that a little bit ago when we were talking about the secure messaging escrow services that are available.
Yes.
Luxi is one of them. I think it's LUXSCI. They've got a service like that. My last job when I was at Philips, we had one in-house called SDT, or Secure Data Transfer.
Okay.
And it's it's used in the same way. But once again, I'll caution everybody that if you're getting an email to go pick up a message at one of these escrow message services, just be mindful that it may not be who you think it is, right? That's a really good way to fish people, is to get them to think they're going to pick up something, and it's not really who they think. So we talked a little bit about, LastPass will only fill out the credentials for a legitimate site, but I think just in general, the better practice is if you get one of those emails, just don't click the link at all. You can launch the site directly from your password manager, or you can just type in the URL itself and go directly to the site. And if something just seems a little questionable, call the 1-800 number, or create a support ticket, or just get some kind of additional confirmation to make sure that whoever you're talking to is who you think they are.
Yeah, and I do like that. That's another feature in LastPass, is that, when you save that password, that record has the URL attached to it, and you can go right in there and launch it from that record in LastPass. I like that as well.
Yeah, it's usually faster than even just Googling the site and clicking that. I mean, you type in 3 or 4 characters, click the button, and you're off to the races.
All right. So, we talked a lot. I know a lot of what we talked about, or let me just clarify what you talked about, right? And gave us knowledge on is technical. And I know our accounts payable teams, they're out there trying to pay bills. Some of them still trying to do it from home. But, fraud is still a reality that we have to deal with. So what do you see as a final takeaway that the accounts payable team members that are listening today, what do you see as final takeaways that they need to do?
Well, one thing that I think is great is that you and I are having this conversation here and now. I think one takeaway would be for anyone in the AP space, just have similar conversations with your technology department to understand the controls that you have in place right now, and maybe ask questions about what kinds of things are maybe on the roadmap to improve those things in the future. I think us as security professionals really need to rebrand ourselves as business enablers rather than just obstacles that make everybody's jobs more difficult, because unfortunately, the more controls we put in place, the more overhead that creates for AP and anyone else to be able to function efficiently. So security is a team sport, and we'd love for you to join the team, basically. And then, of course, you can't protect what you don't know about. So just making sure that you're asking questions and paying attention during those security awareness trainings, and just helping us evangelize that security first mindset.
Yeah, I love that. Paying attention during the security awareness training, not just checking that box.
Right. Yeah. The box needs to be checked, but there's a whole lot more than that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So thank you. This was such good information on, what those technical controls are that the IT team, are out there putting into place so that these fraudulent emails, don't get to us. What is the percentage that they're stopping? About 85%. So thanks again, with additional takeaways with what we can do with those extra 15% that are getting through. And if anyone wants to, have additional conversations with you, or just connect with you on social media, where would they go?
Sure. So they can find me on LinkedIn. It's Casey-Allen-MCL. And I'm sure we can put these links in the show notes there. You can send me an email at callen@concentric.io, or you can visit our website at concentric.io.
Okay, perfect. I will put that information, that contact information, in the show notes. And I want to thank you again for coming on. This was really great. We don't always get a chance to talk to cybersecurity professionals, especially those that can tell us about what's going on with our emails. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Happy to be here. Thanks so much, Debra.
All right. Thanks, Casey. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Casey Allen, and I hope you have that same conversation with your IT team. So thanks everyone. I hope you enjoyed the 151st episode of the Putting the AP in Happy podcast, where accounts payable team members are empowered to protect the vendor master file from fraud. Don't forget to check the show notes for the links mentioned in the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing and writing a review of my podcast on the platform that you use to listen. Stay happy.